morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining the call to discuss the report prepared by the Department of Market Monitoring on the market conditions, issues, and performance during August and September of 2020. Here to present the report from DMM are Amelia Blanke, Manager of Market Monitoring and Reporting, Eric Hildebrandt, who is the Executive Director of Market Monitoring, Ryan Kulinski, Manager of Analysis and Mitigation, and then Christy Sanada and Pat Pendergast, who are Market Monitoring Analysts. This is Christina Osborne with ISO Stakeholder Affairs. I'm going to be assisting DMM with the call. So they did post this report on November 24th. It's available out on the DMM webpage. It's also available on the Summer Readiness webpage, and you can find that from that link on the ISO homepage. We did post the presentation for this call earlier this morning on those same web pages. And we're also recording the meeting today, and we'll make that video file available also on those web pages. So the recording should be available probably by the middle of next week. So we are planning to stop for questions, and the event producer will instruct you on how to enter the queue at that time. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Amelia.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. The report we're presenting today, as Christina mentioned, is available on the website in two separate locations. We're hosting this call today really to give everyone an opportunity to ask questions, and I would encourage you to enter questions in the chat or stop and ask questions on the way. And as the producer mentioned, we will stop for those questions. With that, make sure that actually moves. A little bit of background on this report. This report was prepared by the Department of Market Monitoring, DMM. We are the independent market monitor for CAISO and the Western Energy Imbalance markets. It is a follow-up on a prior report, which was prepared jointly by the CAISO, the CPUC, and the CEC. It focuses on the root causes of the load shedding events occurring on August 14th and 15th. This report, the DMM report, provides some additional analysis, offers recommendations based on DMM's own independent analysis, and covers an extended time period. So our report also covers the Labor Day weekend, when CAISO's energy demand forecast was actually forecast to be even higher than August 14th and 15th. But when further load curtailments were avoided, actually due to a combination of different market conditions and steps taken by the CAISO and other entities. I'll mention at this time that a follow-up on the joint report, final root cause analysis, is we're anticipating will be published by the end of the month. There will be further material. The key findings of our report are consistent with the CAISO CPUC CEC report, which I tend to call the joint report. And before I discuss those, I'd really like to emphasize that we agree with the joint report's conclusion that the load curtailments were really due to a series of factors acting together, that there was not a single, really a single cause that led to the load curtailments. First thing is that there was extremely high temperatures and energy demand, not only within California, but also across the West. Electricity demand was well in excess of current resource planning targets. A few notes on that, especially there was especially high demand also in the Southwest, and the kind of load changes that we're seeing have been consistent with the sorts of changes we've seen with both high temperatures and some of the economic electricity demand changes that happened with the COVID and the quarantine at home. Second, California state resource adequacy requirements, so capacity requirements, are based on 1 and 2 year loads. So that's the 50th percentile. Half the time they're going to be bigger, half the time will be lower. plus a 15% planning reserve margin, or PRM. And that, we agree with the joint report, was not sufficient to reflect actual system conditions on these days. Third, counting rules for resource adequacy capacity can overestimate the actual capacity that is available for many resources during the early evening hours particularly. And those are the hours in which these load curtailment events occurred. Fourth, transmission capacity from the Pacific Northwest was derated by about 650 megawatts as a result of weather-related forced outage and maintenance, which prevented additional available supply from being imported into the CAISO. Additionally, there was a sudden loss of several large gas-fired units, an outage on one day, and a reduction in output on the second Saturday, which contributed to the curtailment event. Although overall, the level of gas capacity on outage was not unusually large on these days. The self-scheduling of relatively large volumes of exports in the day-ahead market reduced net imports into the CAISO. And we will discuss this at greater length in combination with the final factor, which is that the residual unit commitment, or RUC process, which is the final part of our day-ahead market, and related real-time bid processing design requires some additional thought and discussion. And we have a more detailed discussion of this at the end of the presentation today. Overall, we found that resource adequacy availability was not unusually low during hours of load curtailment. There is a longer version of this table in the report. As an aside, all the material that I'll be presenting today is in our report. I am happy on this call to take questions on any of the content in the report. So if you do have a question about a particular table or figure, please do let us know and we can address that at the end of the call. This table, which is similar to a lot of the performance analysis that we do for resource adequacy, shows the total resource adequacy capacity in megawatts in the first highlighted bubble. So on the Friday, there was 51,373 megawatts. On the Saturday, there was 51,333. The second columns show the impact of outages in our day-ahead market. The third set of columns here show bids and self-schedules. And the final highlighted columns show the bids and self-schedules in our real-time market, and the difference, finally, between those bids and self-schedules and the shown resource adequacy capacity. So, overall, we find that about 85% of resource adequacy capacity was bid into our real-time market, which leaves a gap of between 8,245 megawatts and a little over 6 gigawatts. Our report breaks this down by fuel type. When we look at solar and wind, we find that these resources account for a significant portion of the unavailable resource adequacy capacity in hours 19 and 20. Particularly in hour 20, on both days, as the availability of solar resources goes down with the setting of the sun, the available resource adequacy capacity bid in by those resources in the real-time market also decreases. So on August 15th, we see that there's about 7% in hour 20. These tables cap all bids from resource adequacy capacity at the shown RA megawatt value. There are similar tables and charts in the joint analysis, and I would expect there to be similar tables and charts in the final root cause analysis that also include a category of capacity called above RA. We have some charts and graphs in the report that include these quantities as well. The above RA quantity is defined as the additional bid or available megawatt from a resource that is shown in part for RA, but not in full. When we do a similar analysis for gas-fired capacity, what we see is that about 92 to 95% was available during these hours. That's a significant quantity, so over 2 gigawatts on August 14th, because so much of our resource adequacy capacity comes from gas resources. When we take a closer look at outages, that explains quite a bit of the gap between shown resource adequacy capacity and what was available or bid into the real-time market. Almost half of the unavailable gas-fired capacity, so about 3% of total RA capacity, was unavailable due to ambient D rates. These are shown in red on the chart. Ambient D rates tend to occur in very hot weather, and that is when the total output from gas units falls below their normal rated capacity due to ambient temperature. More than a third of the almost over 1,800 megawatts of demand response resource adequacy was unavailable on these days. Here we are showing the bid-in quantities. And when we take a closer look at these, we can see that the performance of demand response resources just to take a step back for a second, DMM is planning to publish a standalone analysis that will include some analysis also of the performance of demand response resources. But that input data was not available at the time that we published this report. The chart on the left is showing CPUC jurisdictional demand response availability and credits. The solid blue line is showing the resource adequacy credit. The dashed blue line is showing the additional 15% planning reserve margin adder. The yellow bars are showing demand response program availability on the 14th, 15th, 14th and through the August 18th, and then in the last 2 dates from September 5th through September 6th. Clearly, the bid-in quantities, yellow bars, are not reaching the dashed blue line in any of these hours. The real-time market dispatches are shown in red and are capped at the bid, often fall significantly lower. On the right, we're showing supply plan demand response as provided by third-party providers to the ISO. We're showing here the blue is the supply plan demand response adequacy value. The yellow is the real-time bid availability, and green is showing additional availability that was bid into our day-ahead market. The solid red line is showing real-time dispatch capped at resource adequacy values. The dashed red line is showing additional dispatch of resources not capped at those resource adequacy values, which was higher on these days. I see a question in the chat, which is asking whether RA values in these charts include T&D losses. The RA values in these charts are as reflected in our wholesale energy market, as bid into and as dispatched in the wholesale energy market.
Hey, Amelia, this is Christy Sonata from DMM. Yeah, it does include T&D losses in these figures.
Thank you. And finally, and this is the last, this is one of the last charts in this section. When we look at import and hydro unit RA capacity, we find that about 9% of that capacity was not available in the real-time market. Hydro capacity in particular can be on outage due to fuel availability. We found imports performed generally fairly well, actually both of these categories, in comparison to the overall performance of RA, which was typical for a hot day and high demand hour, between 88 and 85%, 84%, depending on the hour. Finally, this is an example of one of the charts analyzing the impact of inclusion of some of the above RA values. This chart is showing bids in our day-ahead market on Monday, August 17th through Thursday, the 20th, from RA resources and bids of RA capacity from those RA resources shown in the navy. Additional bids from wind and solar resources in that above RA category. So from resources whose NQC, for example, could be below their PMAX. In green, we're showing other above RA resource bids. And in orange, we're showing bids from non-RA resources in the CAISO. And in gray, finally, non-RA import bids. What we see on most of these days, in fact, technically all of these days, is that load was projected to be very, very high. In fact, in real time, there were extraordinary measures and conservation from both consumers as well as large industrial and state entities that resulted in lower demand on these days. On each of these days, the RA bids alone especially on the Monday and the Tuesday, were not sufficient to meet load. In some peak hours, with the addition of the above RA capacity, bids were sufficient to meet forecast load. But on the Monday and Tuesday, these bids were not sufficient to meet the demand of forecast load plus reserves. That is shown in the aqua blue line, and the purple dots actually add the forecast operating reserves plus the additional demand from regulation up. Finally, in the dashed line, we're showing the additional demand on the system from self-scheduled exports in these hours. I am going to stop here and take some questions. I have a number of questions in the chat, and I will take those first. But operator, it's a good opportunity to give people instructions for asking questions verbally.
All right.
Thank you.
As we move to Q&A, please press #2 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue. You will hear a notification when your line is unmuted, and at that time, please state your name and affiliation and your question. Once again, pressing #2 will indicate that you wish to ask a question. And I see we have one person in the queue already. First caller, your line is now unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hey, Amelia. This is Michelle Keto from the CPUC. I just wanted to go over a few things. Going back to page 5, I noticed that you have wind shown there, and it shows it at about 400 to 500 on the 14th and 8 to 900 on the 15th. When I looked at the wind capacity shown on CAISO's website, I show 940 megawatts of wind at hour ending 19 and 1,209 for hour ending 20. And on on the 15th, I see 2,000 at 7 p.m. and 2,300 at 8 p.m. So I just wanted to clarify that that's the above RA portion. And if you included the above RA, it wouldn't be 50%. It would be more like 100%. Is that right?
Correct. The values that you're reading off the CAISO website include both above RA megawatts on resources that are shown in part for RA, as well as the bids or production from resources that are not shown as RA at all.
Okay. So if I had 200 megawatt wind resources that were shown for, their NQC was 100 megawatts, and one produced 50 and one produced 150, this analysis would show the performance at 75%, right? 50 plus 100. So it would, because it caps it at 100, right, at the NQC?
Correct.
Okay.
It caps it at what is shown on that day, which can be less than the NQC.
Okay, got it. Okay, and then going to, let's see, page 11, this is showing the above RA on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, but on the 14th and 15th, were the RA and above RA sufficient to meet load and reserve?
On the 14th and the 15th, I have to go back and pull up the chart. From memory, they were not sufficient to meet load plus reserves plus the additional demand of the self-scheduled exports.
Right. It wasn't able to meet the demand of the self-scheduled imports, but it was sufficient to meet the forecast plus reserves, right? If I'm remembering correctly?
I need to pull that up to be absolutely sure.
Okay. And then can you tell me what the reserves are that are included in here? Is this the 6% operating reserve?
Correct. The aqua line here is showing operating reserves, which are spin and non-spin, which typically are about 6% of load.
And did the operating reserves change in 2017? So I guess it was my understanding that it used to have to cover a single contingency or a single event, I guess. And so that used to be Diablo Canyon, which would be 1 unit at Diablo Canyon, which was 1,200 megawatts. And then I guess it was changed in 2017 to include the California portion of the PDCI, the Pacific DC Intertie. Is that right?
That's correct. I don't recall if that changed in 2017. But yes, our operating reserves do include either it's really 3% of gen, 3% of load, which adds up to 6% of load, or the single largest contingency, which can either be a generator or the loss of the PDCI.
Right, but it changed. But it did change from the Diablo Canyon to the PDCI, even though that's multiple lines, right?
It changed to include the potential contingency there, yes.
Okay.
Of the loss to CAISO of the CAISO portion.
Of the multiple lines. Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Okay, Amelia, this is Pat from DMM. Sorry, I couldn't find a good point to jump in there, but just to address Michelle's question about the 14th and the 15th, for the day ahead market, the bids from RA plus above RA were sufficient to borderline sufficient to cover the forecast plus reserves plus reg up in most of those hours, but not sufficient to cover the added self-scheduled exports.
Thank you. Are there other questions on the phone?
Yes, there are. We have 2 other callers in the queue. First caller, your line is now unmuted. Please go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. This is Ian White with Shell Energy. What effect, if any, did non-harmonized price and or bid caps through between the Western markets and the California markets contribute to any outage?
I think you're asking about non-harmonized bid caps. Currently in the WEC, there is a WEC-wide soft offer cap of $1,000.
Correct.
That is also the energy bid cap in our CAISO market.
Correct.
So could you be more specific about the non-harmonized?
Yeah, it's just we saw the outages occur on the 14th and 15th, and then on the 16th, the CAISO announced that any exports out of its BA would be curtailable. And on the Monday trading for Tuesday, August 18th delivery and Tuesday for August 19th delivery, we saw the Palo Verde bilateral index settle and mead settle above the soft offer cap between $1,000 and $2,000. And my question is really getting at, is there a fundamental problem when you have an administrative price cap in one market or a administrative bid cap in one market that isn't aligned with external markets? And does that contribute to any, economic signals that it would behoove you not to send so as to keep generation in California? Does that make more sense?
Yes, it does. I just note there that that the sales outside of California and WEC are currently under review at FERC.
Yes, that's correct.
Exactly, and that the ISO is instituting some changes in compliance with FERC Order 831.
Gotcha.
Which would change the bidding parameters for bids above the current bid cap.
Okay, yeah. So I think that where we're going is with 831's implementation, eventually I think the idea is to get to a place where those bid caps or price caps, said another way, are sort of roughly equal between ISO markets and non-ISO markets. Would you agree with that statement?
I would just note that the high prices that we did see in the bilateral market were set on the 18th and the 19th. And the times when we did see the curtailed load were actually on the 14th and the 15th, so earlier. But it is an interesting question and worth some more discussion. I will, however, move on.
Okay. I have one more question, if that's okay.
All right. Yep.
Yes. WSPP Schedule C firm contracts govern firm energy bilaterally in the Western Interconnection, largely stated. Should CAISO exports be reclassified to be somewhat less than firm when exports plus native load exceed system capacity?
One of our recommendations, and I'll get to this at the end of the presentation today, is that there be a broader discussion of the treatment of exports from the CAISO market to the rest of the West. And so I'll save that question.
Thank you.
Save that question for that time. Yeah. Are there other questions on the phone?
Yes, we have one more question in the queue. Caller, your line is now unmuted. Please go ahead.
Thank you. This is Barbara Barkovich for Klika. I had two questions, which I had also posted in the chat, and then I'd like to clarify one of the responses by one of the DMM staff. The first question was, when you showed the slide for the D rate for the gas-fired generation because of high temperatures, do you have a percentage D rate as opposed to a megawatt D rate?
So the percentage that I gave here is about 3%.
About 3%.
Of total RA from gas units. So there is gas, there can be gas capacity. There's not much of it, but there is gas capacity that is not shown as RA. That 3% is only of the RA capacity.
Okay, so the RA gas-fired, not the non-RA. Great, thank you.
Correct.
And it's 3%. Okay, the next one is on slide 9 when you were looking at demand response. Did you include partial hour dispatches?
Christy or Pat, yeah, I believe we're taking the maximum.
So the dispatches for each hour is kind of some of the energy that's dispatched within that hour. So it would include, any energy from, I guess, all of the intervals that make up that 1 hour, if that makes sense.
Okay, so that, for example, because you're showing basis, if you had a partial dispatch, that hourly average would go down.
It's not an hourly average. It's literally the energy that is, being delivered.
No, I understand that. What I'm saying is if you had, I'm not explaining myself clearly and I apologize. If you had a resource that was dispatched in the middle of the hour, you would only get half the energy that you would if it was dispatched for an entire hour.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Okay, and then just to clarify something that was said before, the question was asked whether on slide, whether T&D losses were included, and I think you said, I think it was in slide 9, and you said they were included. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the T&D losses would be included in the RA value. I think there's some questions as to whether that is reflected in bids. So the bids literally just represent what we see on the ISO side. but the T&D losses are included in the RA values on this chart.
Okay, but what you're saying is that so what is the ISO seeing then?
So it's whatever the SCs are submitting as bids into the market. And I know that there's been some discussion on whether that should include T&D losses, but yeah, it's whatever the SCs have shown to the ISO.
Okay, so there's a question about that. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then if there aren't any other questions, I just want to make sure that I pick up all the questions in the chat.
There are no further questions in the queue.
The question that says on the chart on page 7, so I'll move back. That chart on this, I'm reading a question from a participant today. It says the chart on page 7 shows planned enforced outages on August 14th and 15th. We see 3 large forced outages in sequence the afternoon and evening of August 14th. When DMM investigated the cause of these 3 large forced outages, what did you find? Would the August 14th load shed have occurred without the forced outages of these 3 plants? We will address this later in the presentation, but I'll repeat something I said at the beginning, which is what we have found is that the outages were really caused by the combination of all of the different factors, not by any single factor. Another question that came in all of the charts again are in the report. Thank you, Christy, for pointing that in the right direction. Finally, the previous questioner did not distinguish between exports from a non-RA resource and simple cell schedules. Isn't that a significant difference even under existing rules? That's a very good question, and we will address that one as well. With that, I will move on. Thank you, everybody, for the questions. One of the sort of focuses of a lot of the analysis that has come out both within our report as well as the joint report, and I expect it as well within the root cause analysis that should be published later this month, is really focused on net interchange. This chart is showing net interchange on the Thursday, August 13th through Sunday, August 16th. We are showing net interchange in the day-ahead market in the sort of brick red color and the dotted line. We are showing net interchange in our real-time market in the dashed red line. And finally, we're showing net interchange, so net imports into the CAISO in the solid brick red line. The blue lines are showing imports in our day-ahead market in the positive direction and exports in our day-ahead market below the x-axis. The yellow lines are showing the same values in our 15-minute real-time market. The gray shading on this chart is showing our resource adequacy imports. Clear on both of the days on which we shed load is that in the hours where we did curtail load, real-time net interchange was higher than the day-ahead value on this day. And on both of these days, the energy imbalance market provided additional import into the CAISO in these hours. There's been some public discussion on the failure of the flexible ramping sufficiency test by the CAISO, and whether that failure, which resulted in the locking of import capability through EIM, limited imports. These charts are showing the net EIM import in the gold bar and the net EIM import in the 5-minute market in blue and in the 15-minute market in gold. The import limits that were set due to the failure of the sufficiency test are shown in red on August 14th on the left and August 15th on the right. What we find is that this limitation really had little or no impact on net transfers from the energy imbalance market into the ISO during these intervals. Second, and this is covered in more detail in the report, we find that EIM transfers were limited by the total available greenhouse gas import supply in some intervals on both of these days. Another factor highlighted in our report is out-of-market actions. On both the 14th and 15th, as well as the high demand period that followed, we find that out-of-market actions increased supply in the real-time market, potentially lowering prices. On this chart, we are showing average hourly out-of-market energy and market export curtailment in hours 17 through 22. Internal exceptional dispatch of internal generation, both minimum load energy and energy above minimum load, is shown in blue. Manually dispatched imports are shown in green. Imports from emergency assistance are shown in yellow. And export curtailments are shown finally in red. When we take another look at that on an hourly basis, so rather than looking at an average over time, we can see significant hourly out-of-market dispatch of imports and emergency assistance on both the 14th and 15th, particularly coming from both Malin and Palo Verde, shown in blue and green. This chart, I think, addresses the question that came in over the chat before. What this chart is showing are export bids. These are day-ahead export schedules which cleared the HASP, our hour-ahead market, with a real-time scheduling priority above real-time load curtailment. That is the sum of each bar on this chart from the 12th through the 18th. The red bars on the bottom are day-ahead self-schedules backed by non-RA capacity. The yellow bars are day-ahead self-schedules not backed by non-RA capacity. Sometimes these are referred to as price taker, PT, or less than price taker, LPT schedules. And the green bars are day-ahead cleared economic bids. So the question was asking us to make this distinction between export bids that are entered into the CAISO's market with as being backed by non-RA capacity, which are then given a higher scheduling priority in our day-ahead market above self-schedules that are not backed by non-RA capacity. All three categories of these were passed from our day-ahead market into our real-time market on these days with scheduling priorities above real-time load curtailment. The bar on this chart is showing the period from which virtual bidding was suspended, which it was for less than a week. That suspension of virtual bidding was one in a series of steps that the CAISO took to ensure that exports were limited to physically feasible levels. Effective September 5th, CAISO made important enhancements to the residual unit commitment RUC market and the real-time scheduling priority of day-ahead energy market export schedules that do not receive RUC awards. CAISO's current policy after September 5th still prioritizes exports that receive day-ahead RUC awards over native CAISO balancing area load in the real-time market. DMM's recommendation is that the rules and processes for limiting and curtailing exports used by the CAISO and other balancing areas should be reviewed, clarified, and potentially modified, with the goal of establishing equal treatment and expectations of exports by all balancing areas. I'll note here that the CAISO has started an initiative or announced the beginning of a new initiative called demand prioritization. And we expect that to be a forum for this discussion. This is a good time to stop for questions. Are there any questions on the line?
We do have one question in the queue. Caller, your line is now unmuted. Please go ahead.
Yes, this is Ian White with Shell Energy again. I first just wanted to say I really appreciate DMM staff making themselves available for this. I found this really helpful and very much appreciate the work that went into the report that you published on November 24th. It was really helpful and very clear. So I want to thank you for being available on a call on a Friday close to the holidays. So thank you. And I had one final question, and sorry, I'm kind of asking questions out of order. This question, it kind of harkens back to demand response. And my question is, what obligation, if any, do residential and industrial demands have to help reduce peak loads without reimbursement for lost opportunity? I guess I'm kind of concerned here about quote unquote conservation fatigue if it becomes an issue into the future. So I just kind of wanted to maybe suss that out a bit. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. I think there's going to be an extended discussion of demand response, both potentially in the we're publishing a standalone report. I think the root cause analysis will also address that, and I expect that this is going to be a discussion also in the venues at the CPUC. There was a question in the chat asking about settlement of exceptional dispatch over our interties. There are different ways that those out-of-market imports are settled. There are set settlement prices for emergency assistance, which comes from other areas. Out-of-market exceptional dispatch can and was typically during this period settled as what is generally called bid or better. which refers to, which is either a settled price or the bid. There's a question about the demand prioritization initiative and whether it's posted on the ISO website, and I do not have the answer to that. But it was announced. Yeah.
This is Christina. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. It's actually going to be called Summer Readiness 2021. Greg discussed it during the board meeting yesterday. We are going to be noticing it soon with some details. We're looking to put out the notice next week, so just wanted to clarify.
Yeah. Thank you, Christina.
Sure.
Some additional findings, because we don't have that much time and I want to make sure I get through the end of the report. Western EIM functioned well and helped facilitate transfers of available capacity in the real time, not just into CAISO, but actually across the West. Second, and this gets to a question that was in the chat earlier, we have reviewed major outages which occurred on August 14th and 15th, and we have as yet found no indication of false declarations of outage or any manipulation. And finally, contrary to some suggestions in the media, DMM has found no evidence that the market results on these days were the result of market manipulation. We have found that the day-ahead market was structurally uncompetitive during the high load days in August. This chart is showing the number of hours on each day in August where there was a failure of the residual supply index was less than 1 in either the removing one pivotal supplier, 2 pivotal suppliers, or 3 pivotal suppliers. Second, we did also publish our price cost markups. These have been interpreted in a way that I don't think is really supported by the analysis, so I'd like to explain these. What these show is that reducing the bids of gas resources or imports would not have significantly lowered the price when we rerun, and we do this by rerunning our day-ahead market software. These results are for the period August 14th to August 19th. What we're showing are the actual average prices, our base case, so we replicate the market, our scenario prices, and we're showing this for 3 scenarios, and then finally in the bottom shading, the combination of all 3 of those scenarios. And we're measuring the price cost markup as the difference between the base case price and the low weighted average price. What we find over this very short period is that there's about a 3% or $5 markup. The way that I would choose to interpret that is that system-wide mitigation of imports and gas-fired resources would not have lowered prices significantly. This is a measure of impact, not of behavior. And finally, our recommendations. First, around resource adequacy, really to place a high priority on the key recommendations that were also in the joint report, both increasing resource adequacy requirements to more accurately reflect the risk of these kind of extreme weather events, and continuing to work with stakeholders to clarify and revise the counting rules for resource adequacy capacity. On exports and imports, further changes and clarifications in the rules and processes for limiting and curtailing exports, which should be discussed and pursued in conjunction with other balancing areas. And finally, on demand response, to ensure a higher portion of demand response used to meet RA requirements is actually available during the critical net load hours. And with that, I will stop for questions on the phone.
We do have one question in the queue. First caller, your line is now unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Amelia. It's Chris Devon from Customized Energy Solutions. Can you hear me all right?
Absolutely. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Amelia. Thanks for the presentation. Really interesting. I just had a clarification on the imports discussion that you had mentioned earlier about the out-of-market kind of emergency imports. And I just don't have an understanding of kind of how that impacts the market with that bid or better payment and settlement of that. Does that impact the market pricing at all, or is that just totally outside of the market?
Those are settled out of the market. There's actually a very good explanation of the out-of-market imports in our 2017 annual report.
Okay, thanks for that. I did see that that noted in that footnote in the report, so I'm going to have to take a look and read through that. And then my other question, just real quickly, is do you have any plans to look at any of the battery behavior? Because I didn't see that in the report at all, and I know there's been some questions around that. I know it's a pretty small part of the market, but just curious if you are going to look into that at all as part of this, or is that just something we'll have to think about in the future?
We do look at battery behavior, and we are planning to publish our Q3 report. We have been including some analysis of storage resources in our quarterly reports. This one is exceptionally large, so we may save that for the annual report this year. But yes, we will look at that. But like you said, it's a relatively small generation source in our bid stack.
All right, very good. Thank you very much.
Sure. And there's a question in the chat, which was, wouldn't it be expected for the CAISO BA to be uncompetitive if there's a supply shortage and subsequent EEA3 condition? Absolutely. The way that we calculate our structural competitiveness measures is by stacking up available bids against load forecast. So yes, and then removing either one pivotal, two pivotal, or three pivotal suppliers. So in cases where supply is insufficient to meet demand, yes, you would expect conditions to be structurally uncompetitive.
We have no more questions in the queue at this time, but as a reminder, dialing #2 will place you in the queue.
Any other questions in the queue, Jayla?
We have no questions at this time.
Okay. All right. With that, thank you, everybody, for your time today. We really do appreciate the questions. So if you do have any further questions in reviewing the report, please feel free to reach out to DMM.
Great. Thank you so much, Amelia. Thank you.
That concludes our conference.
Go ahead, Jayla. Thanks.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.